In a turn of events that has shocked fans of Discovery Channel's Gold Rush, two of its most well-known figures, Tony Beets and his son, Mike Beets, have found themselves at the center of a legal firestorm that has ended with life sentences. Known for their gritty determination, tough-as-nails demeanor, and the rough-edged authenticity that endeared them to millions, the Beets family was once a symbol of frontier resilience and gold mining tenacity. But as courtroom doors closed and verdicts were read, it became clear that their off-camera dealings had crossed a line from hard business into criminal territory, leading to consequences neither of them nor their loyal viewership could have ever imagined. The roots of the case stretch back several years, buried beneath the layers of television fame and the larger-than-life persona Tony Beets had cultivated as the so-called King of the Klondike. While the show primarily focused on gold mining operations, the business behind the scenes was far more complex and cutthroat. As Tony expanded his operations across the Yukon, buying up land, dredges, and equipment, there were whispers of legal gray areas, under-the-table deals, and labor disputes. Yet those whispers never took shape into anything actionable, until a whistleblower came forward with damning evidence that would lead to one of the most sensational criminal trials in Canadian mining history. According to official documents and courtroom testimonies, the charges against Tony and Mike stemmed from a multi-year investigation by Canadian environmental authorities and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. What began as a routine review of mining permits escalated into a full-blown criminal probe after inspectors allegedly discovered deliberate violations of environmental protection laws, falsification of land use documents, and what prosecutors later described as a systematic disregard for human and ecological welfare in pursuit of profit. One of the most critical pieces of evidence came from drone footage and satellite imaging that showed mining activity in protected zones, including lands reserved for Indigenous communities and environmentally sensitive waterways. Despite being told on multiple occasions to cease operations in these areas, the Beets Mining Company continued its dredging and excavation, allegedly falsifying paperwork and hiding their activity from regulators. Former employees were brought in to testify, with some claiming they were instructed to ignore safety procedures and environmental guidelines. One employee, whose identity was protected for safety reasons, described witnessing the intentional discharge of fuel and waste materials into a nearby river, a violation that could not only devastate the local ecosystem but also affect communities downstream. But it wasn't just environmental crimes that would bring Tony and Mike Beets to the brink of legal disaster. Investigators also uncovered evidence of labor violations, including the employment of undocumented workers, wage theft, and unsafe working conditions. Testimonies described a culture of fear on the mining sites, where speaking out was met with immediate dismissal or worse. Some workers described being forced to work with defective machinery, and in at least one case, a serious injury was allegedly covered up to avoid a government shutdown. This created a picture of a company where the pursuit of gold had completely overtaken basic human decency, with profit margins taking precedence over both the law and moral responsibility. The case finally reached its breaking point when a cache of emails and financial records was obtained through a subpoena. These communications revealed that both Tony and Mike were not only aware of the illegal activities, but were actively involved in orchestrating them. Internal memos showed them discussing how to bypass permit requirements and how to pressure lower-level staff into compliance. In one particularly damning exchange, Tony allegedly told a foreman, "Make sure no one talks. If they do, we'll handle it." This cryptic message was presented in court as evidence of intimidation and coercion, a pattern that prosecutors argued was essential to the family's long-standing mining empire. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric, with public and media attention focused intensely on the trial. Supporters of the Beets family gathered outside, holding signs and calling the case a witch hunt, motivated by jealousy and political pressure. Meanwhile, critics pointed to years of overlooked misconduct and exploitation in the mining industry, suggesting that the Beets case was emblematic of a much larger issue. As witnesses took the stand and cross-examinations grew more intense, the prosecution methodically laid out a case that was as much about environmental justice and human rights as it was about illegal business practices. The defense team, for its part, attempted to paint Tony and Mike as hardworking entrepreneurs caught in a web of overregulation and bureaucratic red tape. They argued that the violations were minor and unintentional, that any damage was exaggerated and that the family had made efforts to correct their course. But the weight of the evidence proved too much. The judge, in his final statement before delivering the sentence, described their actions as calculated, cold, and motivated solely by greed. He pointed out the irreparable environmental damage caused by years of unauthorized mining and the clear evidence of worker exploitation. This court cannot and will not allow the rule of law to be discarded for the sake of reality television, fame, or financial gain, he said, before sentencing both Tony and Mike Beets to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted, some with gasps, others with tears. Mike sat in silence, head bowed, while Tony stared ahead, his face expressionless but his eyes betraying the gravity of the moment. Their family members, many of whom had worked alongside them on the mining sites and appeared on Gold Rush, looked stunned and heartbroken. Discovery Channel released a terse statement soon after the verdict, saying they were deeply saddened by the events and would be reevaluating the show's future. "We thank our viewers for their loyalty over the years and commit to maintaining the highest ethical standards in all our productions," the statement read. The ripple effect was immediate. Sponsors pulled out of the show and fan forums were ablaze with debate, some defending the Beets as victims of a broken system, others expressing outrage that such behavior had been allowed to flourish in plain sight. Environmental groups hailed the verdict as a watershed moment for mining regulation in Canada, and Indigenous leaders issued statements urging further investigation into other mining companies operating in sensitive areas. "This case shows what happens when industry is allowed to police itself," one leader said. "It's time for real accountability." For the gold mining community, the sentencing of Tony and Mike Beets sent a powerful message. Regulations that had long been treated as optional were now being enforced with an iron fist. Many smaller operators began reviewing their own practices, fearful of a similar fate. The Canadian government, emboldened by the successful prosecution, launched new oversight initiatives and vowed to increase inspections across the Yukon and other mining territories. Meanwhile, Tony and Mike began serving their sentences in separate, high-security prisons. Media requests were denied, and a gag order prevented the Beets family from publicly commenting on the case. Those who knew them described the transition as harrowing. Tony, once the rugged symbol of frontier masculinity, was now confined to a 6x9-foot cell, far from the open wilderness he once ruled. Mike, who had always looked up to his father and followed in his footsteps, was now grappling with the crushing reality of a future stripped of freedom, autonomy, and legacy. The psychological toll on the family was immense. Minnie Beets, Tony's wife and longtime partner both in business and on screen, was said to be devastated, withdrawing from public life and selling off properties and equipment in an attempt to salvage what remained of their empire. Other children of the Beets family, some of whom had tried to distance themselves from the mining business years ago, were now thrust into an unwanted spotlight, fielding media inquiries and public scrutiny. As months passed, documentaries and investigative reports began to dig deeper into the Beets saga. What emerged was a complex, often troubling portrait of a family that had walked the line between ambition and avarice, finally falling into a chasm of their own making. Some former allies came forward with stories of ruthless decisions and behind-the-scenes manipulation, while others described a more nuanced view, men who believed they were protecting a way of life, unaware or unwilling to accept the changing norms of accountability and environmental stewardship. In the end, the sentencing of Tony and Mike Beets marked more than just the fall of two television personalities. It signaled the end of an era. The rugged individualism and anti-authoritarian streak that once defined the gold mining culture of the Yukon could no longer operate outside the law. The show Gold Rush, which had drawn millions of viewers with its promise of adventure, fortune, and human drama, now stood as a cautionary tale about the costs of unchecked ambition. The Beets name, once synonymous with mining glory, would now be forever linked to scandal and criminality. Years from now, when people look back on the golden age of reality television mining, they will remember Tony and Mike Beets, not just for the gold they pulled from the earth, but for the reckoning that followed. Their story, once filled with hope and success, had ended behind bars, a sobering reminder that not even kings of the Klondike are above the law.